Riot. Si se puede. Returning to Phoenix once again to cover ongoing protests against neo-Nazis and the National Socialist movement, this time in 2010. I watched as the streets of the city exploded in fierce battles between police, black bloc anarchists, and fascists, in the context of an immigrant movement tightly controlled by the left, as well as police attacks on indigenous and anarchist militants. The riots were seen as a turning point for the revolutionaries in the city. Again, more background information can be found on the Phoenix Class War Council site, firesneverextinguished.blogspot.com. Quote, when we permit the police, Klan, and Nazis to terrorize whatever sector of the population they wish without repaying them back in kind, in short, by not engaging in mass organizing and delivering war to the oppressors, we become anarchists in name only. Kawasi Balagoon. Canisters are hurled into the sky, exploding into smoke as they hit the ground, only to be kicked back towards the police. Purple smoke billows into the air, making its way upward, encircling the tower buildings. The sound of shots fill the street as police fire round after round of pepper balls into the crowd. Your proletarian hero is at it again. I'm in the southwest now, Phoenix to be exact, and I'm standing on what appears to be a completely deserted street in the heart of this desert. Save of course for three groups, anarchists, Nazis, and the police. The latter two groups, though, seem more of a coalition than two separate entities. One almost can hear the music in the background playing. As if I was stepping out onto a street from a dusty old saloon, hand cocked on a pistol, but it's smoke grenades that are rumbling past me, not tumbleweeds, dear readers. Still, for the two groups assembled here today, this town is by no means big enough for the both of us. Taking a moment out of the riot, I paused to clutch my face, as my eyes and skin burned from a cloud of pepper spray that has made its way right for me. Through my burning eyes, I noticed that people aren't running away. The line is being held. People fall back when the police attack, but only for a bit, just enough to avoid the gas. Then they are regrouped, aided greatly by medics and friends, cleaning eyes and helping comrades. Together now they unleash rocks, bottles, hunks of concrete, which rain down on the police and the group of about 30 Nazis behind the lines, carrying American flags and shields with swastikas. I learned later that many within the Nazis group had left early because of the violence. Several newspaper boxes are quickly appropriated and placed in the middle of the street as a barricade. Together, people beat the boxes, making primordial rhythm. A banner, one that the police have not yet taken and destroyed, reads, "We are war machines." The crowd gathers again, some in all black with masks, others wearing only street clothes. They look at the advancing police army surrounding the group of neo-Nazis and declare, "No passaron." They shall not pass. When I stopped to catch my breath, I realized that people have been doing this for close to an hour. On Saturday, November 13th, 2010, several hundreds of people responded to the call from Phoenix Class War Council to face off against 20 to 40 members and supporters of the National Socialist movement, perhaps one of the largest white supremacist neo-Nazi groups currently in the United States. The NSM, which does about one public event a month according to the white nationalist website Stormfront, came to town in November of 2009. Like this year, in 2009, hundreds of protesters responded to a similar call as the NSM rallied on the steps of the state capitol. While the police forced the NSM to shut down the rally ahead of time due to such a large and rowdy counter-protest, the violence was nothing like that what occurred on the 13th. The scene from the street on Jefferson was one that does not usually play itself out for anarchists in the United States. I almost had to ask myself if I was watching a street battle in Europe or in Latin America. No, this was Phoenix, not Athens, Greece, or Santiago, Chile. We were in the nearly deserted downtown, surrounded by glass buildings and almost entirely empty streets, save for several stragglers, cars, police, and protesters. The riot against the NSM is perhaps the largest uprising that anarchists have participated in the city of Phoenix for the last 10 years, and its success brings up several points of discussion as anarchists continue to struggle and intervene in Arizona, as well as around the world. Whose streets O Adam land? Much has happened since the NSM made its way to Phoenix in November of last year, only to be escorted back to their cars by the police before the permit even expired. Tensions over speed cameras have continued. Anarchists have pushed for a critique of them from an anti-border and anti-white supremacist perspective. anarchists in the PCWC have continued to push the fractions and tensions within the Patriot Libertarian Constitutionalist movement, supporting a pro-working class and anti-racist line of attack. In early December, anarchists helped shut down speaking event of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and in January 2010 helped organize for a revolutionary bloc within the massive march against him. What made the bloc of the anti-Arpaio march different than others was who it represented. It was called the DO Circle A, Dine, Odama, and Anarchist Bloc, and represented a union of Dine, Navajo, Odaham, and anarchists. The north area of Arizona is the indigenous home of the Dine people, and in the area close to Phoenix and Tucson, O'odham people live on both sides of the U.S.-Mexican border. The indigenous and anarchist organizers of the march made it clear that the purpose of the march was not only to stand in opposition to Arpaio and the state, but also to stand against the recruitative and bureaucratic organizations that had called the march. As the call for the march read, "We hope to use this formation on the streets at the January 16th march against deportations in Phoenix to project a vision for a different mode of resistance that breaks with the stilted, uncreative status quo that dominates movements and organizing in town. This document is our explanation of the type of force we would like to put out there and why we think it's necessary." Unquote. DO Circle A made a clear connection between the forces that oppress, destroy, and colonize indigenous communities, deport and hinder organizing Latin American migrants, and attack working class people throughout the United States. That force is an economic system of capitalism, and the government that exists to make sure that the system stays in place. Again, from the call. We recognize what appears to be an unending historical condition of forced removal here in the southwestern so-called U.S. From the murdering of the O'odham peoples and the stealing of their land for the development of what is now known as the metropolitan Phoenix area, to ongoing forced relocation of more than 14,000 Dine who have been uprooted for the extraction of natural resources just an hour north of here. We recognize that this is not a condition that we must accept. It is a system that will continue to attack us unless we act. Whether we are migrants deported for seeking to organize our own lives, forced to migrate to a hostile country for work, or working class families foreclosed from our homes, we see the same force at work. Indeed, in many cases, the agents of injustice are one and the same. Unquote. The DO Circle A bloc was historic. It represented a revolutionary coming together of forces from both the anarchist movement and indigenous struggles, not to mention those who do not see a distinction between those two currents. It was anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, anti-statist. It was also clearly against the leftist and mainstream protest organizations that wanted to work with the system. It instead pushed for direct action. Lastly, it was strongly in favor of working class resistance to capitalism, linking the struggles of working and poor people with migrants and indigenous, not separating them, while at the same time attacking white supremacy as a cross-class relationship that hinders the liberation of all peoples. In mid-January, however, at the end of the massive Arpaio March, in which the DO Circle A bloc participated, the police moved in, attacking, punching, and arresting several people clearly singled out by the DO Circle A bloc for attack. 5 people were arrested and ticketed, with trumped-up charges of assaulting an officer and rioting. The police made one thing very clear. They were not interested in protecting the free speech of the DO Circle A bloc, which was part of a legal, permitted march. Their very presence was enough for the police to react with violence. The coming together of working-class whites, anarchists, migrants, Chicanos, and native people represented too dangerous of a force to be allowed to publicly march. Proving to be the all-too-loyal opposition, Puede, a mainstream immigration organization, the organizers of the march, denounced the DO Circle A bloc, instead supporting the police lie that the marchers brought violence on themselves by attacking the police first. Anyone who watches the footage of the march can easily see that the police acted first against the marchers. The Puente leadership, which calls up to the mayor and other city elites, has nothing in common with those in the DO Circle A bloc. So it's clear why revolutionaries draw lines between themselves and reformists. It is important to keep the attack on the DO Circle A bloc very much in mind as we talk about resistance to the NSM in November of 2010. Because, as we see, the police are willing to beat, arrest, and attack one group while protecting, in some ways, working with the other. This is how we do it.
And I can see through the walls now. Need to go to City Hall, try to tear the walls down.
Willie Northrup. On November 13th, about 40 to 50 Nazis, a group that grew smaller, with the National Socialist movement were confronted in the streets of downtown Phoenix by about 200 to 300 counter-protesters. The anti-Nazis were made up of a variety of people, but the largest group was anarchists, native warriors, and leftist pro-migrant peoples, and religious organizations such as the Unitarians. The day started with people gathering in front of the Federal Building. where the Nazis were planning to rally later in the day. The banner was dropped shortly after people began gathering around noon, and about 2 p.m. the Black Bloc found the Nazis marching from their parked cars, which was the same site they had used the previous year, to the Federal Building. Many of us then started to run around the corner and down the street to where the NSM was marching in formation, with the police out in front for their protection. A standoff began then between the anarchist-led group and the NSM, protected by the police. From about 2 o'clock to 2:40 p.m., the street was held, and as expected, both groups chanted and traded insults. A friend of mine was positioned behind the Nazis, videotaping, and heard more back-and-forth interactions between the police and the Nazis as the NSM became more and more angry that the police were unwilling or unable to move their march forward and get the group towards the Capitol. As 3 o'clock quickly approached, more and more people within the crowd thought as soon as the clock struck, the police would call off the rally and lead the Nazis back to their cars, since their permit ended at that time. The Black Bloc went into action at this time, getting into a formation which allowed reinforced banners to hide the group and allowed militants to be able to launch projectiles. After several rounds of rocks attacked the fascists, the police sent in a snatch squad, and one section of the Black Bloc moved away from the front line in order to avoid arrest. However, after the section of the Black Bloc fell back, the snatch squad simply withdrew into the larger crowd of police. It was around this time that the police decided to spray the front of the crowd with pepper gas. I had my back turned and was trying to give a young hooligan my bandana when the gas entered the air and everyone started to run. The crowd quickly looked for the nearest projectiles and returned fire. Medics and those in the crowd who were not throwing rocks, or whatever else was humanly possible, helped those with burning eyes and skin tend to their wounds. The crowd quickly remassed and again held the line. Then began a running street battle between police and the anarchists that lasted 45 minutes until the Nazis were finally delivered to the Federal Building, which was located down the street. Anarchists during the skirmish acted with utmost bravery, unarresting people, taking blast after blast of pepper spray, and physically combating their enemies. When Nazis finally made it into the Federal Building courtyard, they only stayed for about 45 minutes. Their tired and boring speeches were drowned out by counter-protesters who came to taunt them. Even NSM write-ups of the event point out that NSM supporters were not able to hear the speeches or participate in the rally. Afterward, the NSM members were taken back to their police cars. Cops then arrested 2 protest participants as they were leaving the event. According to many organizers who I spoke with, there were several ways that this street battle broke out of what normally occurs at anarchist street actions. First, the anarchists were in a leading role, not simply coming to another event and hoping for the best. They organized good and hard for this outcome, and their organization paid off. Revolutionaries who came out to shut down the NSM had clear goals and clear ideas about how to achieve these goals. This allowed others to plug into their actions and see how their energies could be placed. In a movement racked by apathy toward getting anything accomplished, it was refreshing to be around others who took their ideas and actions seriously enough to put a fair amount of time and energy into planning. Various affinity groups came together and plugged in where they could, which helped the larger organic uprising against the police and the NSM. These affinities and levels of organization did not come out of thin air, but from years of hard and ongoing organizing and various statewide meetings between various groups, collections, and organizations. Furthermore, people simply were not afraid of the police. Instead of running when the police brought out pepper spray or when they advanced, street fighters simply stepped away and then came back, all the while attacking with projectiles. As one friend said after being pepper sprayed, "Your eyes hurt for a minute, but then you realize you're still alive, and then you're back in it." This process through which we discover new ways of life and become powerful was the spark that drove those fighting on the 13th. Through the pepper spray and hurled stones, you could make out laughter and see smiles even beneath masks. Take the knife off the AK.
You better have your cat in hand, 'cause man.
Biggie. People were packing guns again. It was both a thrill and a heavy dose of frightening reality, and to see people in the streets running with us while carrying on the side. Also, being in Arizona, who knows how many other people were also carrying concealed, which is legal here without a permit. While a shootout between the two groups would have been bloody, we should remember that both fascists and their opponents are armed and willing to openly show it. The lie of free speech and the necessity of direct action. Quote, "There is free speech only for the rich." George Lincoln Rockwell, the American Nazi Party. During the entire event, police acted and coordinated with those within the march. They were seen using hand signs towards the rest of those marching behind them, giving a clenched fist when they needed the group to stop. At one point, the police even moved to the right side of the street, allowing the NSM stormtroopers to move on the left side of the street. Perhaps this was done to move the anarchists out of the way, or simply bait us into attacking the Nazis, so police had the excuse to gas us. Police also allowed JT Ready to walk into the crowd and engage with the protesters. At one point, the crowd began to hurl spit and insults and projectiles at him. A large African-American man came up and protected him as he walked back to the federal building. He stated, "You have every right to be here." This is interesting and yet sad consideration since Reddy thinks he has every right to deport this man back to Africa. This man was later heard saying, "If those kids had a better education in school, they would know that nonviolence works." The thoughts and actions of this man represent the poverty of thought behind the free speech position. Though we've all heard it before, the faith in free speech is based on the concept that the government and the United States allows us all the freedom to say what we want, to express ourselves politically in a peaceful way as long as we do not break the law. Thus, any attempt at limiting free speech of others is an assault on the free speech of all of us. So the line goes. Furthermore, we should not attack those who wish to do us harm because the government exists to stop any sort of extremists who are attempting to illegally harm citizens of this country. Meaning, even if they want to kill us, Uncle Sam has our backs and will deal with them. The problem with this line of thinking is that the state and its police are not neutral. The state has organized numerous times to attack social movements aimed at transforming and liberating humanity. The government attacking groups such as the Industrial Workers of the World and the Black Panther Party for self-defense are good examples. Furthermore, COINTELPRO through the 1960s through 70s was designed to stop and hinder social movements for liberating the United States, even some on the right. Through a campaign of disinformation, murder, and terrorism, the U.S. broke apart, assassinated, and destroyed various organizations and people for the sake of keeping the status quo. In the current period, we have found that under the Obama administration, the state has expanded its apparatus of surveillance, gone after whistleblowers such as Edward Snowden, and kept extensive documents of everyday people as a means of monitoring potential insurgency. In this country, if you challenge capitalism in a meaningful way, you will face repression. This is why the state tries to steer us into legal avenues. Want to protest? Sure, get a permit. Make sure the police are there to keep you on the sidewalk. Want to strike? Sure, make sure you go to the union bosses with your problems. They'll work it out with management. Want to make the world a better place? Sure, get a job with a nonprofit which gets state money to do the work the state used to do. To the state, you are only free to speak as long as you are reading from their script. We do not need a government to allow us to say what we want or to organize in public. As the Eugene-based anarcho-punk band Axiom growls, that's a natural power, not a right. As we've seen, the government will stop us with violence when they need to, when our movements become a threat to the established order. Lastly, we can't rely on the government to protect us from right-wing racists who may simply talk about deporting massive amounts of people and imprisoning many more, when that is exactly what the government is currently doing, especially in Arizona. The state is not here to protect us at all, and so the state is not concerned with free speech. Governments are designed to make sure that class anger between those who own and control the means of existence and those who do the work does not tear them apart. They are concerned with keeping the social peace and see revolutionary groups as a serious threat. Elites are fine with angry as long as it's expressed in allowed formats. So, write a letter, hold the sign, even read a socialist newspaper if you want. Just don't go on a wildcat strike, firebomb the police state, loot a grocery store, or try and stop a Nazi march. We can say things in this society, but it's important that's where it stays. That is why the state was willing to attack anarchists within the immigration march in early 2010 while defending Nazis in November. Police wanted to send a message that a demonstration legally sanctioned by the state, the NSM rally, was going to be protected with its full power, and all those who were willing to fight in the streets, which by the way is exactly what Hitler claimed was the only way to stop the rise of fascism, were going to be put down with massive force. The same way the state wanted to send a message during the legal march against Arpaio by attacking the anarchists, to the immigration movement this was clear as crystal. Get with the revolutionaries and you will be arrested and attacked with all the power that Uncle Sam can muster. Anyone who supports the idea and the line of free speech supports the government's platform. But we anarchists are not here to play by the state's rules. We are here to destroy the capitalist government. Give up Aryan activism. When I returned from Phoenix, I began reading a lot about fascism, the Holocaust, and one of the pioneers of neo-Nazism in the United States, George Lincoln Rockwell, the leader of the American Nazi Party. Rockwell was important because after his assassination in the late 1960s, former party members would go on to create organizations that led to the formation of the National Socialist Movement. Politically, the ANP, and thus the NSM who followed its lead, pursued an activist and electoral mode of organizing. For the ANP and the NSM, this means constantly being in the public eye, getting as much media as possible, and being on the streets wherever they can. The more they fly the flag, the NSM contends, the more the people will come rally to them. Rockwell had standard politics for a national socialist at the time, although he stressed he was not a fascist because he supported free enterprise. More racist lemonade stands and less racist state-owned factories. Yay! Rockwell never led an organization of more than 200 active stormtroopers, men who lived in AMP barracks and outfits. A lot of the AMP's influences through support and literature reach out far beyond. Although the AMP's influences through supporters and literature reached out far beyond its membership, what is interesting about the AMP is, unlike the KKK, they placed a lot of importance on staying inside the law. Rockwell envisioned that he could gain power by being in the public eye, making Americans aware of his program so that during the time of the economic downturn, he might become more and more popular until he could run for president. The AMP used the civil rights movement as a point of intervention, hoping to gain support among those opposed to desegregation, leftists, and supported the war in Vietnam. Strangely enough, Rockwell also saw the fact that they were called Nazis, publicly displayed the swastika, and gave the Hitler salute as pluses for the organization. Without the word Nazi, Rockwell commented, the news would not cover the AMP. With few members, police harassment, the threats of violence at all times, and low funds, the AMP's actions never went beyond simple rallies, flyering, and giving speeches. They certainly failed to awaken many whites to an Aryan consciousness. However, such organizing on the part of Rockwell did turn many onto neo-Nazi politics, and helped usher in a new generation of racists that today comprise groups like the NSM. While the AMP failed to take power, it did succeed in at least creating the next generation of foot soldiers. Seeing Rockwell's AMP as their political forebears, the NSM holds onto their activist electoral strategy in order to gain entry into higher halls of power in the United States, hoping to totally transform it into a fascist empire. Like the AMP, the NSM is using politics of the day to make a name for itself. In the 1960s, it was the civil rights, and today it is border issues and the fight over immigration. The NSM is hoping to use anti-immigrant sentiment to its advantage and pull more mainstream Americans into its ranks. Like the AMP, it uses Nazi imagery of the party to gain media publicity, although it helps to soften its imagery by consistently referring to itself as a law-abiding, white civil rights organization. Rockwell, for all the venom aimed at the Jewish U.S. government, worked closely with the FBI, giving them information on each and every stormtrooper, letting police know where they would be traveling and where they would protest and much more. When AMP members left the organization, he alerted the FBI. That way, if the ex-AMP members committed any acts of violence, they could not be tracked back to Rockwell. This is funny because the AMP was ripe with infiltrators, as we can be sure the NSM is as well. Some on Stormfront even accused JT Reddy of being a Fed. In an interesting note about the AMP, COINTELPRO was involved in disrupting the organization, crafting rifts between the clan and playing off various members of the AMP against each other. Rockwell could have waved the flag of the FBI all he liked. They still didn't like him. But they saved their real guns for the Fred Hamptons of the world. Despite this, following the state's rules does not bring protection, and allows you to be a Nazi out in the open while police beat back your detractors. This is a formula that NSM has followed everywhere it goes. It arrives with a swastika flag, counter-protesters attempt to attack, and the cameras go click, and thus the NSM is at quite a crossroads. It needs the Nazi imagery to get attention, but it also wants the mainstream whites to join them, which the whole Nazi thing kind of kills. At the same time, while riots against it give it publicity, it also makes the NSM seem weak. In many ways, groups like the NSM are a dead horse, passed over by an era of Facebook invites and grassroots organizing. There seems to be little room for them in their tired, boring brand of flag-flying Nazi speeches. Even when the NSM tried to make entries into the Tea Party, they got the cold shoulder. JT Reddy was welcomed with open arms before he was outed as a Nazi, but when he and some of his buddies showed up to a teabagger shindig with a Hitler portrait, they got the boot. But the threat of these groups lies not just in their existence, but in the idea that they will help raise the next generation of Hitlerites. We can deal with the activist NSM, but one that is focused on direct action will be much, much scarier. For now, though, the NSM is weak and under attack. Like the AMP before them, without massive police protection, the NSM would be beaten down and broken apart at most of the rallies they organize. And like much of the white power movement, the NSM is often derailed by infighting between members and splits within the party. As anarchists and other radicals continue to physically confront the NSM, we are making it hard for these groups to organize and meet new people. We're also making it less attractive to join the organization due to possible violence. While media attention is drawn to the NSM when we physically confront them, attention also goes to us, and will appear as the only ones willing to stand up and physically confront the Nazis. In short, the NSM lost the media war in Phoenix, just as they do every time they get their asses handed to them. What publicizes the NSM also publicizes the abilities and superior numbers of the anarchists. We are seen in the context of popular rebellions against not only the Nazis, but also the state and its police. In the aftermath of the riots in Phoenix, many people left energized and ready for battles to come, hoping the riot would provide a springboard for more radical actions. Moreover, these actions gave credit to the idea that people can self-organize and act outside of activist groups that seek to manage and control popular protests. Anarchists should also look to the communities that innocent and other neo-Nazi groups reach out to, mainly working class and poor white communities, expressing that our enemies are not other poor working people led by a mythical Jewish order, but the ruling class. Likewise, we need to keep in mind that Nazis are simply reacting and feeding off of what the state is already doing. If we are not also struggling against attacks organized by the government on indigenous communities, the border, deportation of migrants, etc., then we will not be fighting the conditions that give rise to many of these extremists. The NSM doesn't operate detention camps or conduct sweeps that break apart families and fill jails. The state does. By the time I get to Arizona, people on the West Coast often ask me why I'm excited about Arizona. For one, I'm excited about the place where anarchists actually support each other and play a part in each other's struggles. Living in a place where anarchists rarely travel even the short distance from one town to the next, it's hard to believe the degree in which solidarity does exist. Arizona is inspiring to me, because the bonds that people have made over the years are lasting and growing more powerful. People on the 13th could have been terrified. Why should we go out onto the street and confront the NSM? They could have asked, knowing the police were willing to attack them during the permitted marches. What might they do to people in an unpermitted action? But people stood their ground. They came out, with or without charges, for months before. They were not going to be scared of taking to the streets. Anarchists in Arizona took their vengeance for the Arpaio March. The price was the blood of the fascists and the fear of the police, as rocks rained down on them, while we cried pepper spray tears of joy. These affinities and relationships of Arizona anarchists have not come out of nowhere. Anarchists have been holding statewide meetings to talk about how they are going to respond to what is happening for a while now. In large street actions, they have found each other and tested their abilities. Groups such as the Phoenix Class War Council have also managed to develop a, dare I say, oh-so-American anarchist theory that speaks to the current situation without looting too much from Europe or anywhere else. It is against white supremacy without the pitfalls of identity politics. It is insurrectionary without being idiotic or grandstandish. It is class war without the dead-end leftism. In short, advances have been made in both the world of theory and the world of practice, all the while not separating the two forms from each other. Meanwhile, indigenous militants, in groups such as Odom Solidarity Across Borders Collective, and fighters from Flagstaff have also created and built and maintained a revolutionary indigenous politic that has informed and grown within and alongside Arizonian anarchism. Lastly, the connections being made between all sections of the exploited and oppressed is inspiring. People are working together against common enemies and towards common visions. Despite the divisions that capital places between us, that in itself is inspiring. So when they ask me why I'm excited about Arizona, I tell them this. It is a place where sons of immigrants and the daughters of natives and the children of settlers don masks and fight together, where they chant Riot, si se puede, and indeed it has been done. And in that moment, we can feel the common humanity that unites us all and reminds us that together we are fighting for freedom.
Dear Joe Arpaio, it's time we fight back. Okay to break their jaw, cause they ain't fighting fair. Okay to break the law.